Judas Iscariot, the Sanhedrin and Pontius Pilate were all involved in the process leading to the death of Jesus Christ. Let's briefly identify their role in the death of Jesus, after which we will discuss how they all died. Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' 12 apostles, is infamous for betraying Jesus to the Jewish authorities for 30 pieces of silver. After the arrest of Jesus, Jesus was taken to the high priest Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish legislative and judicial court, sought to condemn Jesus, but faced difficulty due to conflicting testimonies from witnesses. Ultimately, Jesus' own affirmation of his identity as the Son of God and the Messiah was used against him. The charge of blasphemy, according to Jewish law, was punishable by death. However, under Roman occupation, the Sanhedrin lacked the authority to carry out a death sentence. To secure a death sentence, the Sanhedrin brought Jesus before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, framing the charge in political terms. They accused Jesus of claiming to be the king of the Jews, a potential threat to Roman rule. Pilate, initially reluctant and finding no fault in Jesus, tried various means to release him, including offering to free a prisoner, as was customary during Passover. The crowd, influenced by the chief priests, chose to release Barabbas, a known insurrectionist, instead of Jesus. Pilate's attempts to absolve himself of responsibility by washing his hands and declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood did not change the outcome. He ultimately succumbed to the pressure of the crowd and authorized Jesus' crucifixion. Now let's first talk about the death of Judas. The fate of Judas after the betrayal is documented in the New Testament, but the accounts differ slightly between the Gospels of Matthew and Acts. In the Gospel of Matthew, Judas experiences deep remorse after seeing that Jesus was condemned. He tries to return the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." However, they dismiss his guilt, leading Judas to throw the silver into the temple and hang himself. The priests, considering the blood money, use it to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners, which fulfills a prophecy attributed to Jeremiah. The Acts of the Apostles offers a different account. Here, it is described that Judas bought a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his intestines gushed out. This gruesome death led to the field being called Akeldama, or Field of Blood. Despite the differences in the accounts, both emphasize Judas's tragic end as a consequence of his betrayal. His legacy is that of a cautionary tale about the perils of greed and betrayal. Now let's talk about what happened to Pontius Pilate. The aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion saw Pilate continue in his role as governor of Judea for several more years. His downfall came around 36 AD, following an incident involving a Samaritan uprising. Josephus recounts that a group of Samaritans gathered on Mount Gerizim, believing a prophet who claimed to show them sacred artifacts buried by Moses. Pilate's forces intervened, killing many and capturing others, an act that led to complaints being lodged against him. The Samaritan leaders complained to Lucius Vitellius, the Roman governor of Syria. Vitellius, recognizing the potential for further unrest, removed Pilate from his position and ordered him to return to Rome to answer for his actions before Emperor Tiberius. Pilate's recall marks the end of his administrative career in Judea. The historical records become murky regarding what happened to Pilate after his recall. According to Eusebius, a 4th century church historian, Pilate fell out of favor with the emperor and eventually committed suicide. Eusebius suggests that Pilate's disgrace was profound, although he provides few details about the circumstances leading to his death. Philo of Alexandria, writing earlier in the 1st century, also alludes to Pilate's harsh governance and the numerous complaints against him, hinting at his troubled tenure and the possible repercussions. However, Philo does not provide a clear account of Pilate's fate. In some Christian traditions, particularly within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Pilate is viewed in a more sympathetic light. The Ethiopian Church canonizes both Pilate and his wife, Claudia Procula, considering them saints. According to these traditions, Pilate's attempts to save Jesus and his wife's dream, warning him about Jesus' innocence, are seen as signs of his reluctant involvement and subsequent repentance. Medieval legends offer a variety of tales about Pilate's end. One such legend suggests that Pilate was exiled to Gaul, modern-day France, and committed suicide in Vienne, where his body was supposedly thrown into the Rhone River. Another legend claims that his body was transferred multiple times, ultimately being cast into a remote alpine lake to prevent it from polluting inhabited areas due to the storms and tempests believed to be caused by his restless spirit. In Switzerland, a mountain called Mount Pilatus is associated with the legend that Pilate's body was thrown into a lake at its summit. These stories, while lacking historical credibility, underscore the fascination and moral judgments surrounding Pilate's legacy. The Gospels portray Pilate in a somewhat ambivalent light. While he is responsible for Jesus' death, the texts also emphasize his reluctance and efforts to release Jesus. This duality has led to diverse interpretations. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, Pilate is sometimes seen as a figure who, despite his actions, acknowledged Jesus' innocence, thus contributing indirectly to the fulfillment of the divine plan. Early Christian writings, such as the apocryphal Acts of Pilate, part of the Gospel of Nicodemus, expand on Pilate's interactions with Jesus and portray him in a more favorable light. These texts often aim to emphasize the innocence of Jesus and the guilt of the Jewish authorities, reflecting the early Christian community's perspectives and theological concerns. Over the centuries, Pilate has been a subject in various artistic and literary works. Medieval and Renaissance art often depicted the scenes of Jesus' trial, with Pilate as a central figure, highlighting the drama and moral dilemmas of the Passion narrative. In literature, Pilate's character has been explored in works such as The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov, where he is portrayed as a conflicted and somewhat sympathetic figure. Pilate's role in the Crucifixion has made him a complex figure in Christian theology and art. He is often depicted as a tragic figure, caught between the demands of Roman authority and the tumultuous Jewish populace. His act of washing his hands is a powerful symbol of his attempt to evade responsibility, which has been interpreted in various ways throughout history. Finally, let's talk about the death of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Jewish Council. This council, particularly under the leadership of the high priest Caiaphas, was instrumental in orchestrating the trial and pushing for Jesus' execution. While detailed records of the individual members' fates are sparse, a combination of historical accounts and traditions sheds some light on what might have happened to key figures within the Sanhedrin who sought Jesus' death. Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest, was a central figure in the plot against Jesus. His tenure as high priest lasted from around 18 to 36 AD, a relatively long period indicating his significant political and religious influence. Caiaphas is depicted in the Gospels as actively seeking to remove Jesus, whom he saw as a threat to the stability and religious orthodoxy of the Jewish community under Roman occupation. Historical records indicate that Caiaphas continued in his role for a few years after the crucifixion of Jesus. However, in 36 AD, he was removed from his position by the Roman governor of Syria, Lucius Vitellius. The precise reasons for his removal are not well documented, but it likely involved political machinations and the changing dynamics of Roman authority in the region. After his dismissal, little is known about Caiaphas's subsequent life. There are no surviving accounts detailing his death, and his later years remain obscure. The New Testament does not provide further information about his fate, and no credible historical sources fill this gap. However, his removal from the high priesthood likely marked a significant decline in his political and social influence. The Sanhedrin was composed of various other senior religious figures, including Pharisees, Sadducees, and elders. Among them, Annas, also known as Ananus or Ananias, the father-in-law of Caiaphas and a former high priest, held considerable sway. Annas had previously served as high priest from around 6 to 15 AD and continued to wield influence through his family's ongoing control of the high priesthood. Annas, like Caiaphas, fades from historical records after the events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. He remained a significant figure within the Jewish community, but specific details about his death are not recorded. His legacy persisted through his sons, several of whom also served as high priests, continuing the family's dominance in Jewish religious affairs for several decades. The Sanhedrin as an institution faced numerous challenges and changes in the years following Jesus' crucifixion. The period was marked by increasing tensions between the Jewish population and Roman authorities, culminating in the First Jewish-Roman War, 66-70 AD. The First Jewish-Roman War had devastating consequences for the Jewish leadership, including members of the Sanhedrin. The revolt, driven by nationalist and religious fervor, sought to overthrow Roman rule. However, the Roman response was brutal and overwhelming. The war ended with the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, a catastrophic event for Jewish society and religion. Many Jewish leaders, including members of the Sanhedrin, likely perished during the conflict or were executed in its aftermath. The destruction of the temple marked the end of the centralized Jewish religious authority in Jerusalem and significantly weakened the Sanhedrin's influence. Those who survived were dispersed, and the council itself eventually reconstituted in a diminished form in other locations, such as Yavne. In short, the killers of Jesus Christ have their own complex and often ambiguous legacies. Judas Iscariot's remorse and tragic end, Pontius Pilate's political maneuvering and uncertain fate, and the role of the Jewish Sanhedrin reflect the multifaceted nature of this historical event. What is your opinion on Pontius Pilate? Do you consider him culpable, or do you think he cannot be blamed? Share your opinion in the comments below. If you liked this video, feel free to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more Bible stories.